Thank you, everybody. Welcome to our Open Finance Committee meeting. Mr. Gilfillan, sitting to my right, is the chairman of the Finance Committee. So Matt will essentially drive the meeting, passing it off to Dr. LaSousa for a presentation. The board will comment or ask questions, and then if we have time, we're hoping to open it up to the public. This is the last of several public finance meetings, as well as other meetings done around town, either at Senior Center, Library, PTO meetings. But this is our final public meeting prior to voting on the budget that goes to the state on April 30th. Matt, did you have anything to add to that, or you want to pass it right off to Mike? Passing it right off to Mike. Dr. LaSousa, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Weber. All right, so this is our second Open Finance Committee meeting, and this presentation, I figured I'd review where we were last time, kind of move through the slides quickly that were already presented on March 19th, then talk about what the Finance Committee discussed since March 19th and what the Finance Committee recommends for the full board for consideration. And then I want to get into a subject that's been in the headlines a little bit lately, which is state aid and how state aid works in Sifri. And then open it up to whatever questions there are and anything else the board would like to discuss.
Okay, very good. I just want to hope that we leave enough time for public comments as well.
I'll fly through the first few slides since
Okay.
we've seen them already.
Don't hurt yourself, but if you can be efficient.
You got it. So the general overview that we discussed last time is that our enrollment is up significantly over 10 years, but it is projected, it's actually down a little bit since last year, and we projected it to be about flat next year. Caveat to that is the high school, which I'll get into in a second. State aid is way down over 10 years, but will increase from this year to next. Our health insurance costs continue to be a challenge for us, and we've made some changes and adjustments this year that we're hopeful will lead to savings in the future. And then, of course, almost all of our revenue, notwithstanding the increase in state aid that we are receiving, is based on the local tax levy. So again, enrollment is growing at the high school. Health insurance, we just moved to a self-insured group called the School Health Insurance Fund. And we should realize savings moving forward. And revenue is all coming just about from the local tax levy. It's important to just highlight a couple of things about local tax levy and how that revenue is calculated and gets to us. But our budget is allowed to grow by 2% over the prior year tax levy. And the 2% is 2% is 2%. So the example I've been giving around PTO meetings and so forth is that if Amazon doesn't choose Newark and instead chooses Chatham to relocate its second headquarters to, even if Amazon ends up paying an extraordinary sum in taxes to the local municipality, that money does not come to the district as increased revenue. Our revenue is locked into 2% of the prior year tax levy, no matter what. In addition to the 2% increase in the local tax levy, we can utilize banked cap, or the Board of Education can utilize banked cap. And banked cap is simply taxing authority that the board did not exercise in the 3 prior years. Then the board is permitted to increase the tax levy by certain adjustments, certain waivers that the state identifies. For us this year, the only waiver for which we qualify is a health insurance adjustment. And the reason for this adjustment is that the State Employees Health Benefits Fund, the fund that controls health insurance for teachers whose boards of education are in the state health program, that increase was 13% in January. So the State Employees Health Benefits Fund for teachers went up 13%. And so our district then is permitted to essentially exceed the 2% waiver by the same amount that the State Employees Health Benefits Fund increased their health insurance costs. And then finally, we are getting a bump in state aid of about 7.8%, and that totals $169,000. So if you put all of that together, our tax levy last year was just shy of $62 million. 2% of that is 1.2. The health waiver is 855 roughly, and then the banked cap, that's unused taxing authority from the previous 3 years, is 150. And all of those numbers together result in a maximum allowable tax levy increase of 3.62%. And again, just going back to enrollment, this is the high school enrollment. This is one of the challenges that we're facing this year.
Can I just ask you to clarify something really quick?
Sure.
The waivers, if they are not used, they go away, correct?
They expire after 3 years.
Got it.
Yes.
So the health waiver that we currently have expires when? 3 years from now?
Correct.
Got it.
And that 150 will expire, that's from 3 years ago. That's the bank
The
cap that
bank's
would
cap
expire
expires
if we
this-
don't use it.
if we don't use it this year.
Correct.
Got it.
But the only way to use the 150 of banked cap is to first use all of the health waiver.
They have to use the waiver first.
Correct.
So if we chose not to use the health waiver, then we lose 150 grand.
Correct.
That goes away.
Yes.
Throw it out the window.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Oh, and as a clarification for the high school, it's just from the 8th grade moving up to the high school, or is that, so it's just existing enrollment?
Correct.
Moving on, the bubble that we planned
Yes.
for?
Yep. So at the outset, our goals and our priorities were to maintain what we're currently doing. In other words, not eliminate programs and not eliminate staff so as to increase class size. To continue to invest in special education, we've tried to broaden our special education offerings so as to better meet the needs of more kids, and to enhance our programs wherever we can. And the one enhancement that we've been discussing for a couple of years has been the introduction of American Sign Language, something that some other school districts have and something that we've wanted to put in place for a while now. So since March 19th, where we left off last time, if you recall, our first pass at a proposed budget from the Finance Committee came in at a 2.98% tax levy increase. And that tax levy increase did not include certain positions that had been requested by the high school administration as well as by the district in general related to mental health. So at the Finance Committee that we had since the last meeting on March 19th, the committee felt it appropriate to add one high school teacher. That would be an English teacher as of right now, though that can change depending on what the master scheduling process looks like. And also to add a student assistance counselor that could service our students across the district. And what we're talking about there is a licensed health professional, mental health professional, who provides critical mental health support for students and is expert in substance use. The two women that we had here in February, I think it was, Lisa Lattarulo and Alex Emmer, are our two student assistance counselors who we currently employ in the district. So we would add a third student assistance counselor to join Lisa and Alex and help us with the volume that they described they're seeing in their offices.
And to be clear, they handled the most critical cases in the district prior to exceeding
Correct.
their capabilities and going and getting additional
Yes.
professional help. Okay.
So with those two positions added, the tax levy increase then would move from 2.98%, which is where we are on March 19th, to 3.28%. So it's about a third or a 0.3% increase over where we were. If you go down the chart, you can see where our banked cap is, where the health benefit waiver is, and how much ends up remaining. So essentially the 3.28, again, remember the max tax levy increase is 3.62. So 3.28 leaves about 0.3 or so taxing authority on the table. That means that there would be about $210,000 of unused banked cap, and 150 of that would expire, or 110 of taxing authority, you know, for that would go to bank cap, but 150 would expire. Okay, so at 3.28% then, this is a review of some of what we had last time. We are counting on the reduction of 3 elementary level teachers, the inclusion of a high school teacher, the inclusion of special education staff at the secondary level, the inclusion of one ASL teacher, that would be at the high school, and withdrawal from capital reserve to do some capital work. The boys in 2 of the original restrooms at Southern, and then the parking lots at Lafayette and Southern, and then the partial roof work that we have on an ongoing basis. The budget does not yet include, so at 3.28, some items that we have discussed but that we do not have in this budget at the present time are additional mental health staff, a psychologist at the high school, a school counselor that we would use probably at Lafayette, some additional staff at the high school, athletic trainer, funding for paddle and sailing clubs, additional security personnel, and additional special ed supervision. Just to kind of touch base on 2 of those items, and obviously this has been even more prominent in the wake of the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, but we've talked a good deal about including more mental health support for students, and also looking at our school security personnel and possibly including Class 3 officers into the budget or into the operation of the school. And then we've also discussed, as we did last meeting, certain other security improvements where we have some initial estimates, but none of that is yet in our current budget. So I showed this slide last time round, and I'll just again mention that this is simply going on the DOE website, pulling down the enrollment, most recent enrollment for all of these K through 12 school districts that sometimes we compare ourselves to, and then going to the Department of Community Affairs website and just pulling down the total school levy in those communities. And this school levy does include, I think, debt service. So it's even beyond just the operating budget and any kind of debt load that the school district might have. And then if you just divide those 2 numbers, you come up with a per pupil tax levy, and you can see where Chatham, falls right behind New Providence and Berkeley Heights. I did want to just bring up state aid a little bit because we don't spend that much time talking about this, but it's getting a lot of attention at the current time. And if you're paying attention, there's kind of a showdown taking place right now between Governor Murphy and Senator Sweeney. So just big picture stuff, and I'm not the foremost expert on school funding, but I just want to give kind of a general overview. The law that governs how the state distributes aid to school districts is called SIFRA, School Funding Reform Act. And it gives out about $8 billion a year. And if you think about it, the state budget is about $35 billion. So a huge portion of the state budget is tied up in direct aid to schools. And the way SIFRA works is that it bases its distribution of aid on mainly 2 ingredients: what a district looks like, and then the financial wherewithal of a community to support its school district. So specifically, SIFRA tries to take into consideration the composition of a school district based on the number of kids that a district has, the grade levels of those students. The reason why grade levels are important is that high schoolers cost more to educate than middle schoolers, who cost more to educate than elementary level kids. The number of students who are learning English as a second language, the number of students who are special education students, and the number who are economically disadvantaged or poor. And SIFRA applies weights to these categories of students, and with those weights comes to a determination about what is the district's adequacy budget. And the adequacy budget is supposed to be the minimum amount required to provide a thorough and efficient education according to the New Jersey State Constitution to the students in the community. So one of the key terms that we get when we receive our state aid allocation amounts is adequacy. What is the district's adequacy budget? But in addition to that, SIFRA takes into account how much wealth there is in a community, and specifically, SIFRA looks at what the equalized property value is basically on a per pupil basis, and then income earned also on a per pupil basis. So then it figures out what is the community's local fair share. And local fair share is supposed to be what the state believes the community can afford to support its schools. And keep in mind that Sifri came into play in 2008 before the current law capping district tax levies at 2%. So this is the law of the land in terms of school aid, yet it predates the 2% tax cap law. So part of what Sifri is supposed to do is bridge the gap between adequacy and local fair share. In other words, if a school district has an adequacy budget and it can't afford to meet the needs of its students and deliver a thorough and efficient education because its local fair share is less than adequacy, Sifri is supposed to step in and equalize the experience of students by giving aid to make up the gap between local fair share and adequacy. Sifri is also meant to change from year to year or be run at least on a regular basis so that those elements like these that might change from year to year are considered and taken into account when the formula is run. But unfortunately, Sifri hasn't been run for about 10 years. It was run only one time, that was for the 2009-10 school year. So, taking a look at Chatham, the state tells us our adequacy budget is about $57 million. That's what the state believes is the bare minimum to educate the children in Chatham. Chatham's tax levy last year was $62 million, like I said on the other slide. So in other words, we're above adequacy. We're exceeding the bare minimum to meet the needs of our kids. And the state tells us that the community can afford $97 million in taxes. So you might look at this and, you know, hear some giggles in the crowd. So it looks like on the face of it, you might say, you know, Chatham's doing well. It's providing a budget that exceeds the bare minimum to meet the needs of its kids. When you actually look at the whole context, the state divides districts by size and by composition. We fall actually in the largest category of districts in New Jersey if you go on the Taxpayer's Guide to Education Spending. We're one of 101 districts with a population of 3,500 or more. And we spend less than 85 of them per pupil. The others that spend less than Chatham are here. There's no J district or Morris County district with an enrollment of 3,500 or more that spends as little per pupil as we do. Here's another way to look at adequacy that's kind of interesting. So that same collection of districts that I offered up a few slides ago, this is the tax levy increase that I was just mentioning. There's that $62 million that was last year's tax levy increase. Tax levy in fiscal year 18 as a percentage of the adequacy budget. So compared to all of these other districts, not only do we have a lower tax levy per pupil, but in relationship to our adequacy budget, Chatham spends also less than these other districts. If you look at adequacy then, and then you do a per pupil calculation of adequacy, and this really should kind of show which districts have a greater percentage of needier kids, either poor kids or students learning English as a second language, or special education students, what have you. You can see that we're also kind of toward the bottom when it comes to per pupil adequacy budget as determined by the state. And then I inserted the column for state aid here, and one of the things that you can see by this is that there isn't right now, because Sifri hasn't been run in about 10 years, there's not really a rhyme or reason to how districts are funded on a per pupil basis by the state.
Mike, how many of those on there have actually growing enrollments?
I don't know off the top of my head which ones have growing enrollments and which ones are in decline. But there's a mix.
We can gamble.
Yeah. Then if you look at tax levy as percent of fair share, in other words, remember, tax levy is what our operating budget is built on. This is last year's tax levy. The fair share that the state determines, this is the fair share for all of these other school districts. And you can see taxation as a percentage of fair share. Chatham is again kind of towards the bottom. I put all of it together right here, and when you when you look at this kind of stuff, it kind of tells you what's behind this sort of thing, which I included in the last presentation. So this year, if you've been reading about this, Governor Murphy's proposal in his recent budget address seeks to try to put in place a plan that would get districts back to the 2009-10 levels of funding, which sounds promising, probably, or encouraging for some of us who would like to go back to 2009-10 levels. And I don't want to get further into the weeds than I already am, but some of the controversy around this is that two things happened when Sifri was introduced and run. And both of those things have to do with the fact that at the time, the legislature didn't want school districts to experience dramatic fluctuations in how much state aid it was getting. So the state didn't want a certain district to lose 30% of its funding and have to, completely destroy its entire education program. And the state also didn't want districts to have some giant windfall that they had never anticipated. So the legislature did two things attached to Sifri. The first is it capped how much aid districts could receive if they were getting an increase in aid. So for districts that were already spending above adequacy, they couldn't receive more than 10% increase in a year of state aid. If they were below adequacy already, they could receive up to 20%. So 10 or 20% were capped aid amounts. The other thing that the legislature did was they included something called adjustment aid. And if you think about this, description here about, actually I'll say financial resources. Some communities, and if you think of a Hoboken or a Jersey City, they may have had, when Sifri was introduced, a lot of very needy students, but their ability to afford their school districts had changed dramatically from 30-something years before when the Abbott decision came down the line, right? They had a lot more property wealth than they had before. To protect communities from losing a lot of money when Sifri was introduced, the state included something called adjustment aid. Adjustment aid was $500 million that was meant to be distributed to districts that were going to lose aid under Sifri so that they wouldn't be harmed initially. And it was supposed to last for 3 years so that districts could step down their dependence upon state aid and increase their own financial resources to meet the needs of students. The problem is that adjustment aid hasn't gone away. It has stayed in place, and right now, if I'm not mistaken, the adjustment aid included in the fiscal year 19 budget is about $700 million. So part of the fight right now between Senator Sweeney and Governor Murphy is that Senator Sweeney wants to redistribute the adjustment aid. He wants to move it from districts that are receiving more than they're supposed to and have been receiving more than they're supposed to according to Sifri for 10 years, and he wants it to give it to other districts that have been receiving less. And Sweeney also wants to get away from capped aid amounts and revert back to an uncapped distribution of Sifri. So getting back to, sorry for that digression, getting back to the current status with Chatham. So again, last time we were here, we had the Finance Committee had contemplated a 2.98% tax levy increase. The max was 3.62. The Finance Committee has since met and has come to 3.28% as the preliminary recommendation for tonight. You can see how the 3.28% would impact the property tax changes on a given home in the borough or the township, an average assessed home, or on $100,000 per assessed value, and you can see the different amounts. So $3.10 on average per month for $100,000 was where we were last time, and now it is $3.40 per $100,000 per month in the borough, and 290 to 310 in the township per $100,000. And our next board meeting is on April 30th. That would be the official and final call for public hearing and adoption of the budget. And that is the presentation.
Back to the screen that shows the actual numbers.
You don't get to jump in before we go, Mary Ann. There's an order to things. Although now curiosity is killing me. Which slide did you actually want to go
Go
to?
back to the slide that had the total number of 60, yeah, that.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to-
You don't mind if I ask a question now, right? So thanks for the high-level summary of Sifri. That's your high-level summary? Now, Mike, the difference between, thank you to the Finance Committee for adjusting from 2.98 to 3.28 to get an English teacher and a student assistance counselor, correct?
Correct.
Which is great. I think we're moving in the right direction. Given the history that you so briefly gave us regarding state aid and adjustment and the fairness in which dollars are attributed to various districts, I would like to discuss going a little bit further toward the 3.62. And if I can, I'd like to change the paradigm a little bit. We were issued a health insurance waiver of $854,488. Typically, when we do our budget, or at least in the last 7 years and years prior, we start with our 2% and pay those expenses, our health care costs, versus using the waiver for what it was intended to be used for. So I think we should start with the $854,000, use the waiver, and don't let the bank cap expire and walk away from it, and then work with our 2%. And if we have to go closer to 3.62 to get the needs of the district, because the 2% is only for our operating budget. The waivers are for things that are beyond our control. Enrollment, growth, not within our control. Health insurance, beyond our control. So if we go closer, my question is, if we go closer or up to the 3.62, just talking about staffing needs, strictly teachers, and Peter, you're probably going to weigh in on this, can we then hire the math and the social studies teacher and possibly funding toward an additional mental health professional?
Well, we can definitely hire the math teacher. I've been working with the high school on the needs of the other departments like world language and social studies. We would, yes, then figure out according to where we are with numbers if it made sense to go for a full-time social studies teacher or just a part-time person. And then we could look at other mental health positions, in particular the psychologist
Hold
at
on,
the
Mike,
high
1
school.
second. Let me finish up, and then I'll pass it on. So the difference between 3.28 and 3.62, based on, I'm just going to use the township because that's the higher numbers, is $30 annually and about $2.50 a month per household, $2.50 a month. So the difference between cutting teachers that we need, that Mr. Groh has asked for 5 or 6 years, and getting them is about $30 annually per household on the high end. I'm using the township. I know it's a little bit lower in the borough, but I don't want to waste time doing the math. So I'm throwing it to the Finance Committee. I'm throwing it to the Board of Education members here. I say this year in particular, we need to go, wait, you can finish. Let me pass it off, that we go closer to the 3.62, not talking about sailing or paddle yet, because I think we can fund that by raising the activity fee and allow the people that are getting those services to pay for those services. So let's leave some of the extracurricular activities aside and just talk about staffing. So, I know Mike Ryan had his hand up. Mr. Gilfillan and I usually fight about this, which is why I bought him peppermint patties before the meeting. But again, I would like to talk about going closer to the 3.62, which is the taxing authority that we have, maybe not doing a second question, working through the security needs with our municipal governments, as Michelle Clark asked us, Michelle and many of the board members had said, instead of putting that in our budget, put that ask the municipalities. We have a meeting tomorrow to talk to them, and let that work itself out. If it takes 6 months, so be it. But just focus on our needs, specifically teaching needs, staffing needs, math, social studies, and maybe mental health professionals. So I'm going to pause. Mr. Ryan, I know you had your hand up, or did I? Is that
Yeah, I just had a question about what are we looking at in terms of class size right now for math and social studies for adding an additional, 2 additional head count there? What are the staff, what are the class sizes that we're under pressure with right now? Are there?
Well, that's what there are. Those are the decisions that the high school has to make depending on the outcomes of these kinds of conversations, and then just deciding which classes will be heavier than others. So, for example, I think Mr. Groh had mentioned to me that AP statistics would have 27, 28 in the class for a couple of sections.
If we do nothing.
If we do nothing. There will be other classes where we are at 25 or 26 or 27, depending on, we have to make those decisions, right? So we might not want 26 kids in a freshman math class, but we might be more comfortable with that with a senior math class, because those kids theoretically are getting ready to go to college. They're more independent and, you know, self-directed. So I couldn't tell you specifically which courses we would end up loading up the most kids. Usually it's our higher level courses where we think there'll be less of an impact to the student learning.
Mike, can I ask you a favor? Could you bring up that slide with the wish list of teachers and counselors? Hang here for a quick second. All right, a couple of quick thoughts. So with the Parkland shooting, there are certainly some of us on the board who are of the opinion that one of the greatest things we can do to keep our kids safe is to focus more on mental health. So I know it's nice that we're talking about an additional math teacher, but I think that these mental health professionals should be higher prioritized. You've done a great job over the 2 years I've been on the board and the year I've been watching closely before I joined the board of focusing on wellness in general. And I think that's where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck in not only keeping our kids healthy, but keeping our kids safe. So I would like to, I know, Jill, you mentioned a couple of teachers, but I'd like to see what it looks like. I don't want to take 3.62 and make that a target, okay? But what do we look like if we're maximizing and taking advantage of bank cap that's going to expire, and we were to put in the 2 teachers you spoke of and an additional mental health counselor, student assistant counselor perhaps, psychologist perhaps? Where does that move us?
Well, that's a Peter question. But if there's about 210 left on the table, right, that's the number that would be left.
210 is between,
3.28 and 3.62.
okay.
A psychologist would cost half of that, probably, which would make room for, you know, at least one other full-time professional, possibly 1.5.
And you would like to see it go towards a math teacher?
That's something that I think we would have to continue to discuss. Where we left off in the Finance Committee, I haven't mentioned this yet, was I think we all agreed, I certainly believe the psychologist and counselor are critically important, and if we were not going to try to incorporate them into the budget now, we were discussing proposing a second question for them. So if the board had an appetite for a second question for the psychologist and the school counselor, then the first person we'd hire would be the math person at the high school. If the board doesn't have an appetite for a second question, I'd have to regroup and talk to our personnel and figure out if it's the psychologist or the math teacher that is most critical.
Okay, so we leave that to the boots on the ground, I think. But in general, a general comment, for the 2 years I've been on the board, we've been trying real hard to be especially frugal in hitting certain performance or certain budget increase, 2%, trying to minimize our budget increase. And when I see that slide where we're at the bottom, it makes me ashamed. And if at a certain point, if you don't invest in the infrastructure, it's going to break down. And it's going to cost a lot more to fix down the road if we don't do it right from the get-go. That's my comment. I'll keep quiet.
Matt, did you have something?
I just want to make sure that everyone understands and realizes that everyone in this town is about to see a if it's similar to what I had my accountant do, go from 2017 and run taxes through 2018, this town, and everyone is about to get whacked on their income taxes. For me, it's a 7% swing year over year. It's a huge number. So, you know, I'm glad we want to go and spend all the money. I know we're sitting here and the rationale is all based on, well, we were so prudent over the years, we didn't jack it up, and we don't have these figures. And a lot of these figures are distorted by the fact that most of these places don't have enrollment growth, and that's what's really hurt us. But we are going into a year where everyone in this town is going to see a very large income tax increase. So you're going to hit income tax increase, school tax increases. Just want to make sure everyone understands that there's big things. You know, we've always said we're going to do our best to think about all the different people in this town, people that don't contribute kids to the school system. So just keep that in mind, that next year is a big change in people's financial profiles. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Mary?
Well, yeah, in addition, we're going to be capped on the amount of taxes that we pay that we can write off, correct?
Yeah,
I
it's a big
understand,
swing.
yeah, it's a big
It's a-
swing.
That's what's impacting.
That's what I think, that's what's impacting it, right?
Those are
Yeah,
the same.
it's the same thing,
Yeah.
but originally people were telling me it was going to be flat, put it this way, it's not. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that there's, you know, people's financial profiles are going to see a big change next year, you know, so we're looking at it from a school tax perspective and then an income perspective, so you have people that are going to see a big difference in their paychecks or their overall income.
Matt, I think you make a great point, but I'm going to play devil's advocate for a quick second. We're not talking about taking a $61 million budget and making it $68 million.
understand.
This is $200,000 that can have a potential tremendous bang for the buck. That's it.
Just a quick time check. I just want to make sure we allow, no, absolutely, Lotta.
Should I ask?
Yeah, no, you go ahead and ask. I just want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for the public to weigh in and see what the sentiment is out there, but
Could you just remind us how the waivers are established? I mean, I know we're having the $150,000 that's going to expire, but is there the potential next year that it would start up again with the healthcare costs increasing? Would it be the expectation that a new set of waivers be given to us?
Yes, the state identifies whether districts qualify for waivers, and every year, probably since I can remember, there's been a health insurance waiver available to districts, at least if they've increased by the same amount or more as the State Employees Health Benefits Fund. So I would assume that would continue to be the case.
The enrollment?
Enrollment is still there, but the state has to determine if your enrollment has gone up enough to warrant more taxing authority. Last year, I think we had about $60,000 in additional taxing authority. That's probably part of the 150, actually.
Okay.
Maybe it was a couple years ago, I
And
forget.
health insurance, and then what?
If the state pushes pension costs, I think, off onto the local district, districts are permitted to make that up in taxing authority, and there's one other, but I can't remember what it is now.
Taxing.
So,
We know what that number would be.
so that 848, Mike, could increase or could lay flat, correct?
Correct. Each year is different.
Right. But that 150 definitely goes away if we don't use the 848, so we've thrown that out the window, and we don't know what happens with what other aid we get. It's all going to be based on enrollment, or whatever else they choose to throw into the mix.
Yeah, in terms of state aid, if Senator Sweeney gets his way, it is reasonable to think we would get more state aid. But that's a question mark.
that's a huge leap.
And as a clarification, it's not money that the state is giving us, it's just giving us the ability to tax.
Taxing authority.
But
Right.
it's not money that we're throwing away. There's no money there, it's just our
Correct.
ability to.
Right.
Money we're not using
Right.
but could use, but yet,
That's exactly right.
I just want to.
The waivers are taxing authority. This stuff is state aid, though.
State aid.
But
That's
we're-
direct aid.
This is direct aid to us.
Direct
We won't
aid, but I'm
know.
saying the waiver.
The waivers.
Yeah, the
are
waivers,
taxed.
right.
Is that right? Yeah, I just
When's
want to
this
say the
decision though,
150.
Mike? It's meaningless to us this year.
Some people think there's going to be another budget showdown like there was last year.
but it's not by April 30th.
No.
Not this year, then? June 30th. Well, if it's beyond April 30th, it's out of the scope of this particular conversation. We can pick it up May 1st.
What was your back of the envelope number, Mike, if it goes to Sweeney's route, how much do you think we could possibly get? I mean, Sweeney's gonna win here.
Well, it depends on a lot of different, it depends on,
Take a guess.
well, really, Matt, it depends on how much adjustment aid is removed from other districts.
Give me a back of the envelope figure.
We got 169 last summer.
Yeah,
This year, we're getting 168.
okay.
If,
That's additional.
that's additional. If
right?
the
So
plan is
total's 2.2, 2.3?
$2.3 million in state aid is what we get right now.
Right.
We were getting about 2.9 in 2009-10.
Yeah.
And uncapped, this is one of the reasons this is important for us, uncapped, we would get about 4.5.
Which we're not getting.
No, we're not, but
See 2.9.
Which gets us back to 10 years
No,
ago.
but that's
Yes.
$600,000.
that won't happen in one felt swoop, though. That will be some kind of 2-year, 3-year, 5-year sort of progression.
And 10 years ago, our enrollment was 40% less than we have. So even if we got back there, we still have 40% more students that we're trying to service. You're coming back, right? Yeah. All right. Mr. Valenti, you're good? Good. Any other comments before we open up to public comments?
No.
Mike, I'm sorry, you're good?
I'm good.
Okay, sorry. Mary, everybody's good? Matt, you're the chair. Are we good opening it up to public comments?
I'd love to hear what the public has to say.
If you wouldn't mind, the microphone is over here. We used to have them on both sides, but if you'd like to get up and comment, and I apologize, we only have about 15, 16 minutes before the regular Board of Ed meeting begins, so if you could be somewhat succinct in your comments, that would be great. But just as a reminder, during the public Board of Ed meeting, the public commentary section comes up fairly quickly, so if you can stick around, please do if you didn't get an opportunity to speak. April, would you mind after you sign in, do you mind putting the sign-in sheet on the podium behind you?
Sure.
So folks can sign in prior to getting to the microphone, just to get more folks moving along. Oh, and we're gonna try and limit it to 3 minutes so that we can get as many folks in as possible. A lot is gonna help me with the timer. Sorry, April, go ahead.
That's okay. I'm April Wingate. I'm president of the Chatham High School Athletic Boosters. And I just wanted to give you an overview. I know I spoke at the last meeting, but to give you an idea of how many students are involved in some of the activities that were up before. Sailing has 19 kids that are enrolled in the program right now. Paddle has 42 kids. In addition to some things that weren't up there that the boosters are helping fund right now, we have girls ice hockey that has 11 girls involved just in the Chatham, and then boys volleyball, which they decided not to come to the boosters for aid. There's 18 students involved with that program, and those families are giving $500 for their child to participate. So we just don't want this town to be kind of you're able to participate if you have, but you can't participate if you do not. We want this an equal opportunity for kids to participate in sports. We also want you to know that it has been consistent that the athletic boosters have given $50,000 in salaries for coaches to run these programs. Now that is not our mission to fund an ongoing expense because the school district has decided they decided not to fund that. So we've actually put a cap on some of that and limited it to $5,000 this year per sport. But $50,000 is a lot of money that is going towards salaries and not going toward which our mission is for additional trips for these kids and equipment and fan buses. Dawn, do you have anything else?
Dawn Druitt, I'm the vice president of the Booster Club. I just wanted to add, in addition to the coaching salaries, some of the items that we've been asked to fund recently really are falling under the category of safety items for our athletes. The last piece of equipment we bought for fencing was really due to a safety issue, that they were not getting the footing that they needed in order to practice their sport safely. So where I think that the perception might be we're paying for some of the swag and the fluff that our athletes get, we're coming to the point now where we're being asked to fund some of the basic safety items that they need to participate in athletics. And I don't think we'd have to debate the positive aspects of our students participating in after-school programs like athletics or music or anything like that. So we just wanted to make sure you're hearing what we're doing here to try and do our part in raising the money that our athletes need. But, clearly,
And what
math
is your
teachers,
ask? What is your ask of the board?
just to keep that into consideration as you're looking at any additional monies you might be able to factor into the budget.
Well, we would also assume that you're going to pick up the $50,000 that the boosters have been, have been giving you for, that's not our mission, is to give salary money for programs so they can exist that are supported by the school board. So.
Could I just ask you, what salary you provide to which coach? I'm just curious.
Oh, there's a whole list.
For instance, I don't know, so I'm just
So-
trying to get educated.
So for instance, just this past school year, $1,250 for a cross-country coach, $7,000 for a football coach, $2,500 for boys soccer, $2,500 for field hockey, $2,500 for girls soccer, $2,500 for tennis, $2,200 for sailing, $1,500 for cheerleading.
And
That's just the fall.
A lot of coaches.
Because our enrollment has gone to so much that it's become a safety issue to have not enough adults per students, or we'd have to cut. If they didn't supplement, we would have
We
to
would be
cut,
cutting.
and that's not ideal.
Cut athletes.
Yes, cut athletes, I'm sorry.
How many football coaches do we have? Does anybody know?
6.
Well, now we have a brand-new program, so I think 5 have been hired, is that correct?
And you pay for 1, correct? It's 2 are
Yes,
voluntary.
we will only pay for 5,000, that's in our budget for this year. But we, like I said, we would rather use that $50,000 for things that the student athletes could really use, for example, equipment. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Ron Epstein, Woodmont Drive. Just a couple comments. Just to follow up on the boosters. My son fences in the high school. Kids were slipping all over the middle school gym, getting injured. The boosters funded for 2 fencing strips. That was $6,000 of funding. So, that was just pure safety. Kids were getting injured. So anyway, just a couple comments. In my view, I would urge the board not to leave the taxing authority of bank cop on the table. Jill's, I think, sense on that is the right way to go. Second point, I don't understand why Chatham is so proud to be the lowest funded per student district in Morris County. That's.
We're proud of it. It's just where we are.
No, there seems to be a pride about it. Matt, I think your point actually about the change in the tax code next year, it impacts everybody in this community. I'm one of them, everybody's one of them. But $50 a year difference between 2.98 and 3.62 isn't going to make a difference. So I would urge that not to be used as a scare tactic to scare people away from funding the budget. And then finally, just one comment I would say, watching the last public debate on the budget, I think we have to be really careful about the security issue. My sense was the finance group thought pretty hard about hiring Class 3 officers, not hiring Class 3 officers, having vestibules, not having vestibules. I would urge, when we talk to the community about this, to be really careful about what you bring in. Class 3 officers are not trained to deal with a hostage situation with automatic weapons. So just bear in mind to be careful about that. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Epstein.
Hi, it's Nicole Chase from the borough. I'm going to stay very high level and pretty brief and just give my opinion that I support the board. First, I want to thank you for all your time. And I want to support you in using your taxing authority to supply what I consider to be, as a reasonable person, the most basic requirements of a school system. If the principal of the high school has to ask for several years for an extra math teacher, an extra social studies teacher, an extra mental health professional, I can't believe that that we have a lot of disagreement on that. I understand that there are other programs that people can agree to disagree on, but when I stand here, I consider myself representing over 900 families that go to Chatham High School, and you represent over 900 families that go to Chatham High. And if they knew that it was within your taxing authority to support basic needs of the high school with growing enrollment, there's nothing we can do about the growing enrollment. It's growing. And there's nothing we can do about the income tax raises. That's going to hit everyone, and that's really not part of your job, is to decide what the education system in Chatham needs. So I ask you to consider the taxing authority that you need to support the basics of the extra math, social studies, and mental health professional that our high school principal has been requesting for several years. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Chase.
Hello, hello. My name is Samantha Eckert. I live in the borough. I am reading words tonight from Amanda Freeman, who could not be here tonight. But I've agreed to read these words because I truly support everything that she says in the document that she's written. So I'm going to read that on her behalf. She says, I apologize for not being able to attend the meeting tonight, but this issue is so important to me that I asked for a statement to be read on my behalf. Tonight, the Board of Education has a critical decision to make, and I challenge you to be bold and use the maximum taxing authority within your power to address critical needs across the district. I ask you to consider the message that you send to all the organizations, such as Education Foundation, Athletic Boosters, Performing Arts Boosters, and the PTOs that raise over $1 million a year, supplementing programs in the district to make sure that Chatham remains a leading-edge school district. I work almost full-time to raise money for the district, and I ask the community to dig deeper and deeper each year because the needs are getting greater and greater. You are elected and charged with recommending what is best for the school district, and you have access and knowledge to information that most in the public do not. I firmly believe that if I can convince people to give at least 10% more each year, then you can convince people that it is necessary to give an average of $330 extra per year, if you believe this is important. Tonight is your job to be decisive, to be bold, and then convince the public that this minor increase is necessary. It is not an asset to run as lean as our district does. As it's been said before, it is absurd we brag about being last in the cost per pupil. I've never understood why we think that's a positive thing. Being last simply means we aren't focused on value for quality, but on cost alone. We've done a phenomenal job for many years, but it has reached the tipping point where there are significant risks to the education provided if taxes are not increased to address critical needs. Tonight, the issues that you are considering are not window dressing. They're critical issues that affect mental health and security. The statistics on suicide that you provided in past presentations are disturbing. In the last presentation, the need for additional counseling at the K-3 level was highlighted and then brushed over to address the greater needs at the high school level. There is clearly a crisis at the higher grades, but we cannot ignore where these crises have started. And adopting anything lesser than a maximum tax increase only puts a Band-Aid on this problem and kicks the can down the road. As I've listened to past presentations, and even with the maximum taxing authority being exercised, it doesn't appear that all needs can still be addressed. If you do all that you can, those of us, like myself in the community, will continue to give as much as we can to raise the supplemental funding. But we must work together to comprehensively address the needs of the district and to convince those who do not have children in the school system that there are times when tax increases are necessary. This is one of those times. Be bold. The mental health and safety of students is what have been put in your care. Thank you. Amanda Freeman.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you all for being succinct. I'm sorry.
Hi, my name's Andy Dinhaupt. I live in the borough. I have 4 children, 1 who's in college and 3 others who are in the system. I'd just like to make 2 points. The first one is we have our largest class right now in the freshman class of the high school, and we have a lot of kids that are going to be coming through, so we have this huge bulge going through the high school, and we need to make sure that we make the investments so that those kids get the adequate education so they can benefit like the older kids and go to good colleges, get a good education, and be able to sustain themselves in the real world. Second point I would make is on safety. I would urge you not to underinvest in safety. I can guarantee you if something happened in Chatham, there would be 20,000 people at this meeting asking why you didn't do more. And I think those two, I would urge you just to maximize your taxing authority to take care of those two issues so that we can maintain the great schools that we have in Chatham. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Tracy Nass, 31 Jeffrey Court in the Township. I also came here tonight to express my support for the school board and all of the trials and tribulations that you guys have been going through and having these open finance meetings where we're able to discuss things, talk about what we can and can't have, what's on the table, what we're going to sacrifice. That type of dialogue is really important, and I think involving the community in it so that we can come up and express ourselves and ask those questions is critically important. I support going to the max for our taxes, for the school taxes. I think it is just unbelievable that we have to decide between a math and a science teacher and a guidance counselor or a substance abuse counselor, and that's the decisions that we're making in our community. And I don't think that we should do that anymore. Having covered the school board for 11 years for a newspaper, I know that we have been fiscally prudent all those years, even though we've had tax increases all those years. That's why we see other schools paying so much more per pupil, because we didn't get a new school like Summit did. We didn't get redo our whole high school. We don't have swimming facilities. We have tennis facilities that are barely making it for the tennis program right now. There are so many things that we fund as a fundraiser for the boosters, for the going to the Chatham Education Foundation. There are so many things that are soft taxes that we also experience. So Matt, I understand your point. We're going to get shellacked in our federal taxes next year. Township taxes are going up, borough taxes are going up, and I completely understand that. But for the minimal amount per family that's going to cost, to be able to add teachers, to be able to add counselors, I just think it's vital to the efforts of our school district and to support our students. So thank you very much for all of the consideration that you're giving.
Thank you. Just for the finance meeting, we're going to take these last two speakers, but again, we get very quickly into the public commentary in the next, so I know, Marianne, I was teasing you before, but, please come up. I know you took that as it was intended.
Hi, my name's Philip. I live in Fern Avenue in the borough. Thank you, board, for your service to our community. I'm here actually supporting some of the sailors, so if they could just raise their hands, all the sailors. There you go. Thank you. But the main reason I'm here, I've looked at some of the data. One of the most important drivers of our property values, for me, my investment in my home and my property is the most important thing to me. And I'm the last guy to stand up here and say, let's raise our taxes. But a good school district and access to infrastructure like the train station are the two main drivers of property values in our area. And I would like you to consider that the effect that having a good school district and having a good school system that has, I think the small increase in taxes is more than is a return on your investment. Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer McNally. I live in the township on Ferndale Road. First, I want to thank all of you for your service and your time up there. I know it's a lot of dedication, hours, and commitment. Just from the comments that I've heard tonight and what I've been reading over the past few days in preparing for this meeting, is that I just want to make one or two comments, is that everyone says here that, you're proud of having the leanest spend per student of all these different schools, but yet you want to reap the #1 rankings that Chatham gets year after year consecutively. So at some point, the system has to break. You can't expect the performance of these kids to continue if we're not going to spend the money to support them. So at some point, how much longer can these kids continue between the physical plant, the lack of teachers, and that sort of thing? You're expecting and demanding extraordinary performance out of kids in 9th, 10th, 11th grade and from before. And the fact that we're even questioning how we're going to support them better to keep these #1 rankings is something that is actually I can't even put my mind around it. So for the leanest spend, yet you have the highest performing schools in New Jersey, I find the irony of being at this meeting very, very, very large. And additionally, what the man before me said is that the housing values are going to be under stress next year. These tax changes impact every family in this room. They impact everyone in this town. And the fact that the tax laws are going to change, and how are you going to attract other families to Chatham with these tax issues, housing values, and that sort of thing? And once they hear that Chatham has the leanest spend per student, how do we expect to attract families to come here and invest in Chatham and invest in the kids? And when I also go, I see the physical plan of these buildings. I don't know how you get the performance out of these kids in the high school that you do. My son's in elementary school. He doesn't want to go to the bathroom at his school because of what the bathroom is like. So the fact that we're even having this discussion and my 8-year-old doesn't want to go to the bathroom at school is still beyond my grasp. So I urge you to go with this increase, and I don't see that there's any other way that we can continue to have the success that we have here, but also to support our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
Oh, my heart's pounding. I feel like I'm gonna, I know
You're
we
going
gotta
to be
go.
our closer, Mary Ann.
I'm gonna be really quick.
No, you're good.
You
Hang
know
on one
what-
second. I'm just going to give... Hold on. One
Mary
second,
Ann,
Mary Ann. Tom, we're just going to take this last speaker and then take a 2-minute break and then come right into the public session. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mary Ann.
Most of what I feel and I've been wanting to say and making notes to myself for the last few days have been said. Mary Ann Howe Township, 3 kids, 2 in college. We've been the beneficiary of this amazing town and community and schools for 23 years. I know we all feel so much that way, and we've watched, this town go through. When you talk about the taxes coming out, yes, we're all going to be hit by that. I remember so clearly and so personally 2007, well, for us it started 2007, 2008, 2009, and coming to these meetings and really, really tough decisions being made about paying our teachers and even giving our teachers, their minimal increase that they were expecting and needed. And you know what? I remember 2009. Our teachers were with us. They were with us. They knew that the whole country was like reeling from a financial crisis. Our town was reeling from a financial crisis. I just remember the teachers really being in it with us. And now when I hear Mr. Groh talk about, my youngest now is a junior, and nothing's ever 100% perfect, but I can't imagine being in a better public school system. I have directors of admissions from the top Ivy League schools in the country telling me our school district is like a fine, small, private school, because that is what we've created. And yes, it makes my blood boil, and I can't even get the words out to say that we're talking about prudence and financial responsibility and fiduciary responsibility, and we've put this in your hands. I know that you guys work hard, and I know it can probably be a very thankless job, but the public used to vote. We all know that, right? We used to vote. It's in your hands now, and as someone said, you are the ones who have the knowledge and information. Most people in the public, we're all doing our thing. You guys are following more what's going on. Mr. Groves said for 6 years, I need an English teacher. And the last thing I'd say about the teachers is, because I think so highly of our teachers and how fortunate my children are and how fortunate my family is, the other thing is, if you start having classes and you want these expectations not only out of the kids, but you want the expectations out of the teachers who have gone from teaching 5 sections to 6 sections just because so they can cover all the kids, and you want to wear down those teachers, you want to keep attracting good teachers? Do you want the word to be like, oh God, Chatham used to be great, but don't go there. They're going to work you to death and you're going to make $10 an hour. Or you don't want that either. So I think you want to be able to, for the kids to perform, the teachers to perform, and I think, thank you, Mr. Groh, and all our principals, and Dr. LaSouza, and I say go to the 3.62, which I wish it were 9.62, but go to the 3.62, and yes, let's not be ashamed. For 15 years that I've been paying really attention to these numbers, for 15 years, I've seen Chatham at the bottom there. And when you talk about state aid, that's a whole other thing. I know I got to go to Trenton for that, but if you go to Asbury Park and you go to Bloomfield and you travel around with sports and you see these schools, Asbury Park was spending $25,000 per pupil for years, and they couldn't get kids to, who could get into college. So what are they doing with $25,000 per pupil a year for all those years? We've got kids going to the greatest schools and doing great things, and we've been spending $10,000, $11,000 to people, and now we're finally up to 15, but we're still the lowest.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
All right, did you?
Thank you, Mary Ann. Thank you all for coming out for the finance meeting. Again, we're just going to take a 2-second bio break, and then we're going to come back and start the public meeting. The public commentary section comes up fairly quickly. If somebody didn't get a chance to speak, they will, probably within 10 minutes.